So here's a question nobody asks. What do you do when one of your oldest friends is Toomas Hendrik Ilves, the former president of Estonia, a European Union nation? I'll tell you what you do. You call him. A lot. My name's Andy Valver. I'm a comedian, American-born, now living in Europe because, well, if you could, wouldn't you? I grew up in the U.S., hearing stories from my parents about a country that didn't exist. At least not on any map you could buy because the Soviets had wiped it out. I only had one buddy who understood, Toomas. His parents were also Estonian, also refugees, and Toomas and I grew up sharing the same traditions, same weird Estonian Saturday school, and same conviction that America and Europe were family. And for most of our lives, they were. The alliance held until it didn't. Right now, the relationship that defined the free world for 80 years is coming apart, and Europe is scrambling to figure out who it is and what comes next. Toomas and I talk about this stuff, and it seems selfish to keep these conversations to myself. So here it is, the Continental Rift, with former Estonian President Toomas Hendrik Ilves and me, Andy Valver. Serious politics, questionable hosts. Hey, Toomas. How are you?
How you doing? Okay.
Summertime blues? No?
Well, I'm dressed up for Miami today, but I'm in southern Estonia.
Southern Estonia, and I'm still in this. I think the heat wave broke here in the south of France. I mean, it's not blistering.
It's coming
hot.
back. It's coming back.
But, yeah, and plus we're going to get storms, I think, tonight and tomorrow night. Anyway, today is July 16th. The Open is underway. That's a good thing. It's a golf thing. Don't worry about it. And today's podcast, we've got a lot of topics. First of all, we're going to talk about the NATO aftermath of the summit in Ankara. We're going to talk about Elbridge Colby, who is not a cheese, although he is kind of cheesy. We're going to talk about Washington funding the opposition in the EU. And then we're going to delve into Russia's hybrid war against, well, everybody. They just don't like anybody. But let's start. The NATO Ankara summit was kind of a success. It's kind of like a family wedding, right? Nobody really wants Uncle Donald. They can't stand him, but they're going to put him at the head table anyway.
Well, at least it wasn't a shotgun wedding. We did have...
it was a pistol wedding, though.
As we talked about last week. Yes, well, in any case, the NATO summit, the measure of success is that the United States did not leave. There was no major blow up. Everyone put on a good face. But the verdict is generally split. To quote Edward Lucas, he says that Europe realizes that the Atlantic era is over. I would argue personally that most people figured it out earlier, but no one really wanted to say it. As Lucas says, it was kind of a pantomime. Nonetheless, it did manage to keep everything quiet, and that's about basically the best you could get out of it because Trump didn't blow up.
Remind me, who's Edward Lucas again?
He's a long-term journalist. He was at The Economist for years and years, and he was at the summit.
Gotcha.
The problem is that, in many ways, it was great. It was a victory for the United States because Europeans have started spending massive amounts of money, unprecedented since, well, the beginning of the Cold War. And so the U.S. could be theoretically very happy with all of this. On the other hand, they're not. Because shortly after the summit, the Undersecretary for Political Affairs of the United States Department of Defense /War, Elbridge Colby, posted a series of attacks on the so-called middle powers, which is kind of a way of not mentioning France, Germany, Canada, the UK, because they are not spending money on the U.S.
So we're middle powers now? Is that sort of a Tolkien reference? It's like, what, Middle Earth?
Middle Earth, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, if you remember, the elves all did depart for the West. So I don't know how far to take that. But the point is that we suddenly have this sort of major policymaker in the United States attacking the Europeans, no longer for not spending on defense, which has been the mantra up till now, but the fact that, well, they're not necessarily spending the money on U.S. tech. And he's basically, he argues that none of this stuff works unless you buy our stuff. And this is a bone of contention that we've raised already earlier in this podcast, which is that, well, if you are not a reliable partner, as the U.S. has not been, Patriots were not delivered, other items were not delivered. When the president says that he's going to downgrade missiles or jets in terms of their capabilities, and as turned out, they actually did that. 2 missiles sent to Poland, limiting their range, that maybe the Europeans might want to buy stuff from elsewhere or make it themselves.
So basically, they're telling us to stand on our own 2 feet and then complaining when we start walking.
That's one way of putting it, yes.
The missiles to Poland thing. So, I mean, that's like selling somebody a Porsche without air in the tires. Not a good metaphor? No. Okay.
No, I would say that's like selling someone a Porsche and limiting it to 80 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, that's even worse. So Colby wants to cut Europe loose, but...
No, his previous bluster was about, we don't need Europe. We should only focus on China because the Europeans are a bunch of wimps and don't spend any money. Now the Europeans have really gotten tough, spending massive amounts of money, ways that we have not seen before, but they're not necessarily spending it on U.S., what he calls the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, claiming that's so much better than anything you guys can do. Well, maybe it's better, but we're never going to get any better if we don't develop our own. And on top of that, what you are selling to us here in Europe isn't always what you advertise it to be. And finally, you may buy it, but then they say, no, we're not going to send it to you, as we saw happen to Estonia, which found out that it had ordered something, it's not coming.
It's the same theory as the Trump phone. Basically, you can order it, but it's not necessarily going to arrive.
It doesn't work the way you think it would.
Exactly.
But it is gold-plated. This is a continuing story of our rifty world. Meanwhile, the Europeans really have gotten together. So basically, a week after NATO Summit, the coalition of the willing for Ukraine gathered the day before Bastille Day, which is the anniversary of the storming of the Bastille, the French National Day, and most of the people stayed on for the big parade. All of the big people were there: Macron, Starmer, Merz.
37 heads of state and government, 5 more than NATO.
Well, I mean, there are countries that also came that are not in NATO, but they still are willing to help. So
everybody marched. It was cool. And the next morning, what happened?
Well, the next morning, Bulgaria said it was not going to be anymore a member, but they were at the parade. But nonetheless, there is a lot of money, 82 billion commitments. So, well, it seems that Europe is moving ahead in this regard.
I mean, if I'm a buyer in Europe and I'm looking at how the U.S. is behaving, I'm thinking to myself, I don't need these guys. I mean, yes, U.S. arms are great and U.S. stuff is great, but there's other people we can buy stuff from.
Well, it's also not only that, but the nature of war is changing. And so much of what the U.S. produces is not necessarily something that Europeans want, or it's very good for a different kind of war. So, yes, we do need Patriots, anti-missile missiles. On the other hand, the entire sort of nature of warfare with drones taking over and
Ukraine is leading the way on that.
No, plus European companies working with the Ukrainians are also doing stuff. So the U.S. is not necessarily the best place for that kind of warfare. So we're going to see this coming up more and more, while the United States official, Elbridge Colby, is bashing the Europeans for not buying more. The State Department has also decided that it wants to support with grants the parties that that probably don't want to spend money in armaments because they get along with the Russians. I mean, this makes like...
All right, which moves on to our second item. And let me just sort of fill in a little bit what's going on. The State Department has started this new program where they are going to fund MAGA type sort of opposition groups in Europe. And the first thing that happened was that Chancellor Merz of Germany told the US not to interfere in German elections. Let me repeat that. Germany, a Western nation, has asked another Western nation not to interfere in Germany's elections. Now, if you remember, that's exactly what the Russians used to do. The Soviet Union used to interfere in elections. Mind you, the Americans did it as well. Okay, it was kind of done.
Okay, yeah, I mean, they're going to support groups that are in line with the shared political philosophy, law, and Western heritage of the United States. Now, I've been following this for a while. And in fact, when I read U.S. officials on what they define as political philosophy, law, and Western heritage, it somehow leaves out the entire Enlightenment, which forms the basis of the of the Declaration of Independence, which is ripped off from John Locke. So, I mean, first of all, I'm really not sure that these people know what they're talking about there when they talk about the shared Western heritage. They seem to think it's shared basically last time with St. Thomas Aquinas. This is potentially a real point of tension. If you're going to start funding far-right groups, MAGA-aligned groups in Europe, in elections, this will be a big problem. Now, what makes it even more bizarre, however, it seems to be failing. I'm not sure if they really know what they're doing, because if you recall, last December, the United States came out with this national security strategy, the NSS, in which they already said we would start to support patriotic forces in Europe against the EU. Very reminiscent of the Soviet Union before invading Hungary or Czechoslovakia at the time, or Afghanistan, saying we support healthy forces. So patriotic, healthy. Right. Anyway, exactly. But it's backfiring. The whole point is that the kinds of people or parties or groups that they said they would fund are not really eager to be that closely associated with MAGA, especially after the loss of Orban in Hungary, where it really did backfire. And of course, now that Orban's out, Hungary's suddenly getting a lot more money than we're ever getting from the U.S. But you see in France, the far-right party, which stands a good chance of winning the elections next year, is pointedly distancing itself from the United States. Now, there's always been kind of a Gaullist anti-U.S. Tradition in France, which cuts across the whole spectrum. But nonetheless, these people do not want to be associated with MAGA. The AfD, the right-wing party in Germany, is distancing itself. Farage in the UK has been forced to publicly disagree with Trump. Trump has very low support across the board in Europe, 10% in Germany, 14% in the UK. Now, the other thing, of course, we have to keep in mind is that these parties that don't want to be like the United States, they're kind of aligning themselves with Putin, which is maybe so it's not that we shouldn't think that it's all going so well. As I said, it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of European-U.S. relations. The summit did not fall apart, but We have lots of new added tensions.
Well, do you think it'll have an effect in Europe?
I think it will have a serious effect on how Europeans think about the United States. Nobody likes to have their politics managed by other countries. And that's true both in Western and Eastern Europe. I mean, Eastern Europe is considered kind of like, well, they're more US friendly. But of course, Eastern Europe was much more affected by interference in their affairs. So I think this is an own goal by the United States in a hyper-ideological State Department that lacks an understanding of where Europe is today.
They really are tone deaf. I mean, they really either they don't want to hear it, or they're just really not that bright. There used to be a lot of bright folks who used to work in the State Department, but I guess they've all been cleared out.
They're all fired.
Yeah. Anyway, well, let's move on.
But speaking of, to continue with the idea of external pressures, we see that Russia is finally being called out for its activities.
Yes, well, that was our next topic, which is the Russia's hybrid war. And they've been doing this for a while. Russia has embraced hybrid warfare, and that's what happens when your military runs out of tanks but has plenty of trolls.
Well, but the hybrid war is a term I highly dislike, but it's become common currency in that it's all forms of manipulation. It's trolling, it's drone flights over airports, it's hacking.
Why don't you like the term?
Well, okay. I mean, hybrid is basically a term used for anything that is below Article 5 in the NATO treaty. That means they're not invading you directly. Now, the problem with calling something hybrid war, I mean, it is war. It's just a convenient term to avoid actually taking action. Hybrid allows you to say, well, we don't know what to do about it. And that has been the response up to now. I go back to the great theorist of war, von Clausewitz, who said, war is the continuation of policy by other means.
I thought the quote was, war is the continuation of politics by other means.
Actually, this comes from an ambiguity in the German language. The word that von Clausewitz uses, Politik, which can be translated either as politics or as policy. It just makes more sense of continuation of policy by other means, because it is actually a policy that you're pursuing of wanting to take over another country. That's not politics, that's a policy to my mind. I prefer that translation in English.
And to me, one of the most egregious things was that Russians were shipping parcels through DHL centers that were flammable, that would explode in the air. Now, to me, that is an act of war.
I mean, I consider most of this acts of war.
Right.
I mean, so too, I mean, sabotaging rail links, which could lead to major loss of life.
They wanted to shut down Poland's heating system.
The defining characteristic is not that we have no real proof it's Russia that did this. That is what hybrid war stands for. Is violent, aggressive acts against foreign countries where you cannot go to a court of law. I mean, this is the basic understanding. You can't prove in a court of law that they did it. Now, the thing is, this is one of these nudge, nudge, wink, wink things. I mean, we know who's doing it. Uruguay is not conducting offensive operations against the Baltic Sea region. Sorry. We know who's doing it, right? But it's a convenient way for Western countries to avoid actually responding to these things. NATO will say, and the European Union, well, look, this is a national problem. This is not our problem because it doesn't really conform to the definition of what an attack is.
Do you think the Europeans are responding in kind?
No, they have not been, because no single country wants to take on Russia.
We just leave that to Ukraine sending drones to their oil refineries.
I mean, there is Single country alone wants to face Russia, and that is the whole point of collective defense. My personal view is that until we get a mass casualty event, we will see no action really against these kinds of attacks.
Let me just stop that there for a second. Do you think that there will be a mass casualty event at some point?
I think it's inevitable given the way, the recklessness with which the Russians have been acting. I mean, putting the explosives in airplanes, true cargo planes, but nonetheless will eventually, if they keep doing that, something will happen. If you sabotage a rail line and a passenger train, high-speed passenger train goes off the rails, again, there will be lots and lots of casualties.
There's the Dutch cameras incident where the Russians had hacked into Dutch security cameras.
Well, but no, that's okay. They managed to hack the cameras on highways, so you know who's going where.
Right.
I mean, we also have a report just 2 weeks ago saying that, well, the drone sightings that we have been seeing all over, especially Northern Europe, over strategic places, that those drones came off Russian tankers or oil tankers or ships that were run by Russia. I mean, these are all things that require action. This is one of the problems of both the EU and NATO, is an unwillingness to actually address these problems, especially because it can always be vetoed by a single member. The most that we've seen is we've identified individuals who have been involved in creating this, and they have been sanctioned as if they were lone actors working in the GRU, the Russian military intelligence branch.
Well, sometimes it's not really hybrid war. It's just kind of incompetence, like what happened at Lake Peipus the other day, which is the lake in Estonia that borders Russia. So what happened there?
Well, basically what happened was that the Russians conducted a live fire exercise, which they've never done on this lake. A live fire exercise means they're using real shells, real bullets. And when you do a live fire exercise, as happens usually in the open sea or the ocean, you notify everyone saying, don't come in here because we're practicing shooting shells or bullets.
That would be polite.
Well, it's just the way things are done. They did not notify anyone. Now, the question is this utter incompetence, which is not to be excluded in the case of the Russian military, or was it a deliberate provocation? And this is constantly a problem with these so-called hybrid warfare moments, which is that, well, even when you can ascribe it to a single country, you say, well, they were just incompetent. But here, this is a matter of courage on the part of NATO or the EU. And then to make it even more complex, there's a lot of collaboration going on with mafia groups. We saw this already in 2007 on the cyber attacks on Estonia. Basically, mafia hacking groups were trying to shut down the Estonian cyberspace, but they do that for money. It's not like they do it out of patriotism.
Cyber gangs for hire.
We're facing this mess, and we have not been able to deal with this effectively because you will always find someone saying, well, we can't really prove it, or we don't know what is going on. Well, the Russians, you have to understand, they're in disarray. So we have not been able to deal with it up till now. And as I said, until something goes really bad.
Nobody's really standing up and going, hey, knock it off.
No. This is a genuine problem of Europe. And of course, the United States is not doing it either right now for its own reasons. This is a broader problem because individual countries have their own little national interests, which basically comes down to making money and do not want to lose that. And so we nonetheless failed for a third day straight to agree on the 21st sanctions package in the European Union, which was first proposed, and we talked about it back over a month ago.
Why are there 21 sanctions packages?
So there's one set of sanctions. Then you revise it. So we're going to put sanctions on that person, or we're going to limit the price cap on oil. Each one is a package. And so we go through this every couple of months, and we get a new sanctions package. And each one usually represents an escalation in the kinds of sanctions that are being applied to Russia.
All right, so it's like a software update. It's like 22.0.
Yes. It's the old stuff still works.
And so speaking of sanctions and stuff, and I guess Bulgaria is not going to sign off on it. And what's the deal with the Greek tanker owner?
First of all, there are a whole bunch of new elements in the 21st sanctions package. Bulgaria, which already we mentioned, pulled out of the coalition of the willing, that is willing to support Ukraine with money and arms, but they have now refused to go sign off on the sanctioning of the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, who is someone who goes around blessing with holy water tanks and missiles used to kill Ukrainians. He won't do that. Everyone else agreed. Nor will they sanction a Russian oligarch, Oleg Perov, because there's some kind of legal operation going on between his company against Bulgaria. Secondly, we have the refusal of Greece to allow the sanctioning of gas transport, liquefied natural gas,
LNG transports, yeah.
Because there's a Greek shipping tycoon who operates 27 gas tankers. He has made about 900 million in the past 3 years from transporting crude oil for the Russians, and so. There again, national interests, and this really burns me up, because when I was in office, I had to do a huge amount of arm twisting and supplication to get the Estonian parliament to approve the six-pack loan to save Greece's economy and keep them from going bankrupt. Because back then, the reason why Estonians were not too thrilled is that basically
we were poorer than Greece.
Way poor. I mean, we were the average salary back then in Estonia was smaller than the size of the pension in Greece. So, I mean, we were going like, why should we bail these people out? We're poorer than they are. They have been profligate, engaged in fiscal ineptitude that would be unimaginable, and we have to go bail them out. And my argument was, we must show solidarity because the EU is based on solidarity. Well, here we are, and now the Greeks saying, well, because we have this tycoon here, we're going to block sanctions and let the killing continue. I find that, frankly, incredibly objectionable. The guy's name is George Procopio, and the Greek government has stepped out in order to defend his business. But there's one more item which has been blocked, which I think affects sort of citizens the most, which is the proposal of the Northern European countries, the Nordics, the Balts, the Poles, to restrict visas to soldiers in the Russian military, since they are engaged in a genocidal war, and the national interest of certain countries, namely France, Italy, that they make so much money from Russian tourism that they blocked that too. So, guys, you can be happy. We're going to see Russian people who have killed and raped and murdered people in Ukraine will not be kept from visiting Europe on a tourist visa.
Lovely. Just Just lovely. Essentially, sort of the big policy issues towards where we want to make will always sort of fall to local interests.
Well, economic interests of the members.
As the old saying goes, money talks and BS walks.
It is a problem, and I think that it will lead to some serious fissures in the European Union in the future if this continues. So we'll see how it goes. But it is not a good sign. The Greek economy today is doing much better than it was because they sort of reined in the irresponsible behavior of the past. On the other hand, maybe sometime, this is one reason why the EU's like an insurance policy and why you basically agree to things that may have some effect on your own economy, but not that much, is that when things get serious in the future, people might just say, too bad, we're not going to bother, go bankrupt.
And the Russians know this, right? I mean, they just probably laughing at us, going, we get away with all this stuff, and Europe will never say boo.
I think they're more worried about gasoline themselves at this point, and that's probably for a future issue when we see how.
We'll do that.
When the Russian harvest fails because there's no diesel for the tractors. The future for Russia at this point does not look as rosy as it did a few months ago.
And the Americans know this too, don't they?
The Americans know this. The Europeans know that things are going badly. My prediction is that if they go very badly, we will have a number of countries saying, oh, but we can't really, let this continue. We have to make the Ukrainians ease up. We'll see. But that's my the sort of black prediction. On the other hand, maybe we'll see some progress on the part of Russia, realizing that without gas and oil, life as a self-proclaimed superpower might not be as rosy as they think.
All right. Well, on that note, I guess we can wrap up this week's episode. Always great talking to you. So much fun. So we'd like to thank you for listening. We know your time is valuable, and so we appreciate you giving some of your time to us. Please consider subscribing or liking the Continental Rift. It helps those algorithms get the word out there. You can find us at Buy Me a Coffee, or you can email us. Send us an email. We'd love to know what you're thinking at rift@freshlens.film. The Continental Rift is hosted by Thomas Hendrik Ilves and me, Andy Valver. Our executive producer is Fred Casella. It's edited by Conan Roberts, with music by the Estonian folk fusion group Babel, and animation and brand design by Roland Seer. The Continental Rift is a Fresh Lens production. All rights are reserved. We'll see you next week.